Welcome, everyone. We have a fun session. I definitely want to thank Dana, Susan, Bruno, and Nicholas for joining me on stage. This session is about Treasury as a strategic ally to the CFO. How many people in Treasury think you are a strategic ally to the CFO? This is the interactive part of the presentation. You ready for it? I ask one more time. How many people in Treasury think you are a strategic ally to the CFO? I want to see hands. There we go. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, my panelists here think they are strategic allies to the CFO, and they have great answers. So let's get into some questions right away. What should, and I stress the word should, Treasury do to become a strategic ally to the CFO?
So when I was probably about 10, 15 years ago, setting up one of our Treasury departments for the first time, our CFO said to us, Treasury owns the balance sheet. We're trying to figure out what does it mean and what we're trying to grow. And those words really resonated with me, and I've carried them all this way, thinking, one, as an owner of the business and responsible for the creation and management of assets, minimization and management of liabilities, and then also the construction of capital, really is pervasive beyond just the processes that we're working with. So I tend to look at our group all the time and kind of dig deep and think about, what are we doing to help to manage and grow the business?
So over the course of my career, I've worked closely with 6 different CFOs, and that CFO role is changing. So traditionally, they were focused on financial figures, making sure the disclosures were accurate. Now I see that they have more cross-functional divisions reporting into them. They have an increasing say on how IT and CapEx is spent. And so just taking on responsibilities that may have traditionally fallen under a COO. So from a Treasury perspective, I want to be able to complement that, really be able to pinpoint what is going on in the business today that is making its way into cash flow trends or other Treasury metrics. And so within Infor, Treasury closely aligns with the adjacent business units. We're constantly talking with FP&A, sales, IT, understanding what their priorities are this year, what strategic decisions they need to make, as those all have a financial impact. And I think that's one way where Treasury can take that information, layer it into our forecast to be more predictive, and support the CFO in a broader role.
Yeah, Bob, one of the things that we're doing, and we spend a lot of time in the district talking about strategy, is looking at how we can strengthen that alliance with the CFO, as well as the alliance with the rest of the organization from a strategic perspective. One thing we did is we've actually implemented a strategic tool that helps figure out what our strategy is, builds our roadmap from a strategic perspective. And by formalizing that, what we've found is that we're in better position to be able to support the CFO from a strategic perspective, as well as the rest of the organization.
And I would say that listening to my fellow panelists here and also the chat that we had backstage, and it was pretty clear that a lot of the focus is really on enabling growth for the organization, but also driving financial benefit of financial performance for the enterprise. So in my role, I get to spend a lot of time with executives that are transitioning into the role of a CFO, the role of a treasurer, and I would say that the themes are consistent across all of that in terms of how strategic treasurers are focusing their time. The big question and challenge is, how do I find the time? And it tends to come down to 3 things primarily: time, talent, and relationships. So on the timing side, a big enabler there is obviously the technology. So how do you free up the time, not just for yourself, but of your people? And around the people, how do you have the right people supporting you? So who are your wing people, wing woman, wing man, that's going to help you get the things done that you want to get done? And how do you work the relationships that you need to have support from in order to achieve what you want to achieve?
No, that's a great point. So I think what I'm hearing from everyone is communication is extremely important, and making sure that you have that alignment between Treasury and the CFO. They know what to expect from you, and you obviously know what to expect from them. Can we talk about some examples specifically?
I think trust is a big item also.
Yes, I'm glad
that
you said that.
there's transparency and being integrally involved in understanding what's going on with the business so that you can bring that back, bake that into your forecast, bake that into your process and your plans. But then also there's a trust that has to come on both sides to be able to know when the right resources are ready. Not every business case is black and white, crystal clear. A lot of judgment has to go into how you develop, and trust is foundational to make that happen.
Yeah, and I would also add to that is that it's important, that trust is important because you want to have that seat at the table when those strategic decisions are being made. And if you don't have that trust, you most likely won't be invited to the table to make those decisions.
That's a very good point. So you have to prove yourself.
That's right.
Interesting. What are some examples that you've encountered that help, I guess we'll say, build that trust, that communication, that prove that you deserve to have that seat at the table that you mentioned? Nicholas?
So,
I mean,
from my perspective?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think there are elements as you free up that time that I talked about, right? I see successful treasurers are spending time focused on business growth. So whether that is being part of looking at transactions during the due diligence process, being part of driving some of the deals that the organizations are making, looking more proactively at the funding, the capital structure of the company to try to have more cost-effective funding, again, place on really helping organizations grow. Most recently, we've seen a lot of treasurers get involved more in working capital as well, right? So I think Jean-Luc and Wolfgang and others talked about that earlier when they were on stage, sort of the working capital aspect, but really harnessing the skills that resides in many treasury departments and working with broader finance to drive working capital improvements. If you're able to free up hundreds of millions of dollars, for instance, what's the value of that to the organization? So those are some examples that I see recently.
Yeah, I would also say, adding to that working capital, so I came from the private sector into the government sector, and one of my goals was to make the organization more nimble. And so we spent a lot of time focusing on liquidity and working capital so that we could be nimble with our investments as well as our debt issuances, which in turn has actually turned out to save us millions of dollars in debt service by being more nimble. We were able to get into the market last week and take advantage of these rates. A few years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So the fact that we've focused on some of these areas, like I said earlier, it's helping us gain that trust with the CFO.
Two examples that I can give at Infor that's been relevant. One is just being consistent with our core treasury deliverables, and that's managing cash and liquidity. At Infor, our cash is seasonal, so every fiscal year we go through a low cash period where liquidity is thin. And so it's critical for Treasury to understand working capital, by entity, and repatriate funds efficiently. And I know the CFO relies on Treasury to get through that seasonality without having to borrow on the revolver. And then the second measurement is a little bit more qualitative. It's just being known as being a relevant group that brings a current or new insight to the table. 10 years ago, Infor made its transition from a traditional on-prem software company to subscription cloud-based. And we knew that that was going to have a material impact to our cash forecast. So just being able to capture some of that impact, understand it, tweak and redesign our forecasting models have enabled us to highlight some of these new emerging trends because of that.
Yeah, and I can add, coming into a unique position where Peloton has really gone from being a very small company to a real force of nature very, very quickly. I came in about a year and a half ago, and there really wasn't a treasury department at the time. So having really take a soup to nuts sort of treasury in a box approach to looking at every area. We had just gone global, so we had to build and develop FX policies, think about how we want to approach hedging. We had just completed a Series F round of financing, and we're planning to head into an IPO. So cash investing was, for the first time, something very relevant and important. And being able to come in where the organization and my CFO was relying on me to provide expertise in how we crafted policies and procedures, crafted those guidelines, and dealing with material flows. My being able to articulate from experience and sort of what we wanted and why I felt it was right, her being able to give me the latitude to take a little risk and try some things and then report back and be successful on that helps build.
No, that's excellent. So it sounds like you have to do your job extremely well. And then you earn opportunities to have a little bit more latitude to prove further how strategic treasury can be. So let's talk a little bit about how do you show how amazing treasury is. I know there's different ways success. There's qualitative, there's more KPI measured. But how does the CFO know how great you are, besides it being obvious?
Yeah, I can start with that. I mean, we do, recently, we've put in a ton of infrastructure, and so now have a lot of visibility into all of our processes in every single one of the core areas of Treasury. So now being able to leverage that data, we do a quarterly business review with our CFO, where we go through each area, dig down deep into the KPIs, but I think what's more important about that review is we don't talk about what, we talk about, well, is that, for every metric we talk about, well, is that the right level? Where do we want to be? What are the next set of projects we need to do to start to move the needle? And the conversation is much more productive and thoughtful thinking than really just around the measurements themselves.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've done by creating the KPIs is that we've also worked on making sure we align employee performance with the KPIs, because we felt that that was a critical element of what we were trying to do, is hold people accountable for what we were trying to accomplish from a KPI perspective. And we've taken those and we've actually formalized them and put them into that strategic tool that we worked on. And what we've done with that is it's created a nice little dashboard for us to sit down with the CFO, at least on a quarterly basis, and sort of show the progress that we've been making with our strategic initiatives, as well as show some of the things that we need assistance on as well. So it's kind of a two-way street from that perspective. It's more of, hey, this is what we've accomplished, this is still what we need to accomplish, and here's what we need from you to be able to support us in accomplishing these strategic initiatives.
Just like you said, Bruno, for me, in speaking with clients, and this is especially true the larger the treasury organization becomes, is that tying those measurements, whether they're qualitative or quantitative, such as KPIs, to groups or individuals in performance actually helps drive the progress a whole lot faster. So whether that is around just as you're evolving, what's my ratio of visibility to cash, to forecast accuracy, to cash productivity, whatever those measurements may be, my cost of capital and so on for capital markets groups, I think that helps drive a very performance-focused culture, if that ties back to what's important to your organization. But I think it's important to tie it back to what's the organization looking to achieve.
I agree with that completely. Actually, an interesting perspective that I've run across lately is this trend towards being more data-driven. And so in my experience, it's been difficult for many treasurers to be able to find the data and extract that data and show it to be able to make an impact in terms of here's the KPIs that we're trying to do it. And visualization, obviously things like bringing dashboards to life really helps bring that data into some meaning that shows, oh, here's what we were successful at. Here's how good we were at forecasting. Here's actually how we reduced our cost of payments or bank fees as an example. So I've found that the data makes a difference. And maybe, I don't know if your experience is the same, but simplifies it a little bit by having tools to be able to manage the data, to understand what is the real performance of my treasury.
Yeah.
So let's talk about from a technology perspective, because obviously we're all affiliated with Kyriba, either users of Kyriba, or Nicholas's case, works with many organizations that use Kyriba. From a TMS perspective, why does the CFO care about a treasury management system? Or why should they care?
I think why should they care is probably the way I would phrase it. First of all, I would go back to the time component I talked about before. Right? It really is an incredible tool to free up time for treasury departments as a whole, which allows you all as treasury professionals or treasurers to spend time on catalyzing change or driving strategic matters for the organization. And second, it's probably the more obvious, the capabilities that it brings that visibility, the transparency. It helps you safeguard the financial assets of the organization. I think those are probably the more obvious things to me as to why a CFO should care.
Yeah, I think they should also care, and they do care, is that basically with all these manual processes, you're really opening the door up to potential fraud on a regular basis. And, from a perspective of one thing that my CFO and I talk about on a regular basis is payments and fraud. And one of the things that we looked at when we were in the process of implementing the TMS Kyriba was how can that help us with those issues that we're experiencing? Because the last thing I want and the last thing our CFO wants is to be in the Washington Post. So being a district government, that's something that we're very cognizant of. And, we have had fraud incidents, but one of the things that we focus on is how do we avoid, dealing with this? And a lot of it is transitioning those manual processes, those spreadsheets into more of a streamlined process.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think there's this growing demand in finance for automation, data transparency, and advanced analytics. And I think a TMS system can give Treasury the tools to be successful in those areas. At Infor, very early on, we were committed to install a workstation. After a series of acquisitions, at one point we had 700 bank accounts across 45 different countries. So the TMS allowed us to automate that daily reporting and essentially made it real time. We also put a control process in place to organize the data. So as the bank files came in every morning, every debit and credit was reviewed and then categorized into a very detailed budget code. So we took a lot of transactional data and grouped them into relevant buckets. Several years later now, we have a single database of really good historical cash flow trends. And so with that information, we've been able to highlight to the CFO working capital across our 90 entities, cash seasonality, currency exposures, flows that were long or short in. And so that TMS system has really been the foundation for all our heavy analytics.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, I think any company's greatest resource is their people. And, I work with an extraordinary team of super smart individuals, and I feel like I am not taking advantage of that asset if they're just key entering all day. And so being able to go from a process, in the past year, we've gone fully integrated end to end through our vendors and vendor onboarding, through invoice collection, workflow approval, into managing our AP ledger, and then out where we're using Kyriba then to interface with our banks and doing all our liquidity management. We can take things now end to end without anybody on the team touching them. Mm-hmm. So being able to pull all that key entry out, and instead the team is now working on really exciting projects like looking at how many of our things are, say, PO-based versus through a manual workflow, and how do we shrink that down? Looking at all of our payment terms that we have with our vendors and trying to really maximize our working capital by managing that. And I have a whole list of projects that we're doing that are all really value added and frankly a lot more fun. And it's win-win because for Peloton, we're getting the most out of everyone, and I hope for the team, they're now getting to enjoy projects that are just sort of beyond taking this data from this system and coding it into this system, then coding it into that system and pushing a button.
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that, because I heard all of you talk about the value of automation in different ways. And I mean, when I got into Treasury a long time ago, productivity was just about saving hours. How many hours can we save? And now it's, what can we do with that time? And I like how that discussion has evolved, because 10, 15, 20 years ago, that productivity discussion would have been so different. And now you're talking about the value is in the team.
Yeah, and I really take issue with over many years back when I was first looking at Treasury automation, the business case was predicated on, well, how many heads are we going to cut? Which I think is just a fallacy, because I've tripled my team on the payables side by putting automation in, and everybody's working on things that are completely value added to the company overall or the bottom line, and I just think it's beautiful.
No, it really is.
Yeah, no, I think making that transition from a transactional group to a more strategic group does a lot for employee morale. I mean, that's one of the things that we're focused on, and obviously the changes are immense in terms of what processes and procedures change. But if you can show sort of where you're going and that goal, I mean, it does a lot for people to sort of say, hey, I'm going to be doing something very exciting now instead of doing all this transactional work I used to do.
That's where I think the Treasury department, and it doesn't matter if it's the treasurer, assistant treasurer, treasury manager, and so on, but really have both an opportunity and a responsibility to drive innovation and realize the full potential of what you can achieve with a technology investment. And today, I don't think it's escaped anyone, right? It's much bigger than just the treasury management capabilities, right? You got a lot of different technologies that, like Dana talked about, right, that it's all integrated as part of the finance infrastructure. So whether it's further automation, whether it's the analytical capabilities we talked about before, leveraging the data that exists, or what Wolfgang was polling everybody about before, everybody's top in interest was machine learning and AI and sort of where that fits in, right? And I have the luxury to spend a lot of time playing with different technologies with our team and in some of our sort of innovation studios that we have. And what's possible today, and I actually think should become an expectation of many of us, if not all of us, is, as I'm driving in or commuting in on the train into the office, right, you can get an automated phone call saying, hey, we've received all bank statements, so these are missing. Would you want me to remind the banks of sending it? You walk into the office, and really through voice recognition, you can really ask your TMS that's connected to more intelligent automation solutions. Well, what's my cash position? What are the actions I need to take today? And you actually get the story both visually and verbally back to you. And yeah, I need to move, consolidate into certain accounts for payments. I'm going to have this much cash available, and yeah, go ahead and execute it. Okay, would you like to invest it like this or like that based on how the system understands your investment policy and the current positions? And then go ahead and automatically execute that. That is possible with technologies today. It's not fully mature, but for those of you who are interested in piloting, you can create a lot of automation and a lot of time freed up in Treasury.
Yeah, well, let's segue to the next question, because this is the one we had fun talking about behind the stage this morning when we were in a chat. You guys are all invited to our discussion, by the way. We're just talking amongst ourselves here. But in terms of vision for technology, I mean, you touched on that already in terms of what you see as that next opportunity. What is the vision of technology? Like, what's that combination of what's achievable right now versus what do you think's next?
I usually comment, right, when we talk to clients or to media, that the treasury management system has evolved a lot. Typically can achieve about 65% automation of treasury activities or so, right? With some of the other technologies that are out there can probably reach about 85-90% if you tap into them to its full potential. But it's really coming to what I just talked about. How do you drive that level of automation and insight to take actions and really move away from the time spent processing? Because about 50% of a typical treasury department spend time on processing or treasury operational type activities. So if you're able to reduce that, the time you can spend on these strategic activities we talked about becomes a greater part of your day. So I think that's an important aspect. Second is driving innovation and having, for lack of a better word, cool technologies in place help attract top talent in the market today. It's become an expectation. And if you want to be a destination for top talent, then you need to have some of these solutions in place.
Yeah, I mean, we're spending a lot of time and resources on implementing new technology and going to cloud-based platforms. What we've found in the district and a lot of governments is that the software systems are antiquated, not supported, a lot of customization, and that creates a lot of issues because the people that used to support it leave, and then basically you're left with a system that doesn't work. So from that perspective, we're looking at making sure that we go take all of the software systems right out of the box, and that means an extensive amount of work done with process reengineering, policies, procedures, which means a lot of people are going to be doing different jobs in the future in terms of what they do today and what they'll be doing tomorrow. And we're actually going through that right now in terms of the process, and we're early on in the stage, but we're already starting to see the transition occur. Obviously, it's not perfect. I mean, you get a lot of pushback from a lot of individuals, but ultimately, they can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I think that's going to be huge from our perspective in terms of, being able to provide additional benefits to the organization.
And I see Treasury as the custodian of the company's bank account, so we safeguard cash. So I think it's critical to leverage new technology, new tools that are out there to improve your Treasury controls against cyber risk and fraud, especially as these bad actors or these fraudulent attempts are becoming more and more sophisticated. It is wise to understand what you have in place already within your organization and what is out there that's new in the market that makes sense to implement. And not just look at your own treasury processes, but look at other departments that touch cash, AP, payroll, billing. Within Infor, we end up seeing a lot of the fraudulent attempts in and around that process-driven area. So I think it's important for Treasury, especially because we typically have the relationships with the banks or with the TMS vendors that can offer these new tools and ideas. It's important for us to bring that to the organization and be part of that conversation. I don't think it's something that will ever go away. It's going to be a constant battle, but it's wise to equip yourself with the right tools to be able to kind of go through that fight.
Yeah, for me, sort of the buzzword of the next decade, I think, in Treasury Technologies API, that as more and more of the organization is automating, the ability for systems to talk to each other and to talk to outside parties, I think, is becoming hyper reliant. And as you can either kind of go deep with sort of one-size-fits-all solutions, or what's nice now in the marketplace is you can pick a lot of these best-of-breed products that do very specific functions wonderfully, or you can pick something that's maybe a core but then bolt on all the pieces that are missing. And I think APIs are really what's going to enable sort of the next generation of all financial technologies to really be able to take shape. So, I actually have been working on a project. We've been very focused on our outbound payments, and now my sort of year to come is very focused on, how we're taking inbound payments from our members. And was talking to a vendor recently who wasn't actually pitching on the functionality I was asking for, but what they offer is really a library of APIs that can allow all these different disparate technologies to talk to each other, which for me sounded like it created almost the best solution. So this counterparty that I actually would have never even thought about, I think is actually going to be probably our winner in our RFP process on this. So I just think that's where investment needs to be made.
Yeah, there's an opportunity there. Nicholas?
One other quick comment on, how do you get there? How do you fully achieve the vision? It comes down to a few things for me. One is investing in the right talent to support the technologies and continue to evolve them for you. Having those right skills and investing in training of those folks is incredibly important. Technologies will not live on their own in that way. Second, invest in training your people that work in finance, that work in treasury, and have folks become more tech savvy and used to using these new technologies. And third, team with your technology partners. Really be with them on the journey to make this a reality for you.
No, I like those points. What I get out of this as a theme is that I heard process and transformation. Yeah. I heard data, especially becoming more data-driven and being able to make use of that. And the connectivity, that concept of a network, is there's so many different capabilities out there. Harnessing them is inefficient if you cannot connect them and integrate them, and I think that was your point. So the key points around this session, how to be an ally to the CFO, sounds like do your job incredibly well, have the right people in your team so you can trust them and hence be trustworthy yourself to the CFO, and be incredibly efficient and resilient to things like fraud. Have the right visibility and controls in place so that you can be effective every day, all the time, no matter when you're going to be asked the question or when that emergency question comes up, you have all the data, information, and visibility that you need to make those decisions. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. I appreciate all of your contribution today. As a segue to other parts of the agenda this afternoon, we have sessions that are on real-time treasury, on treasury and business intelligence. We have sessions on what you expect from your TMS provider, part of the questions that we were talking about just up here. There's a lot of wealth of information throughout the workshops this afternoon. So thank you very much, Dana, Susan, Bruno, Nicholas. great contribution. Thank you for coming.